What are the ramifications if South African rand breaks through in the coming weeks to new weakness, dare I say, to a 20 level? What is the ramification of weaker currencies right now?
Well, we are a central bank that targets inflation. And the focus is on what that would, if such a weakness does materialize, what it would mean for inflation in South Africa. We have started much earlier to tackle inflation. It has come down significantly. It is now closer to the midpoint of our inflation target range. And on the horizon, we actually see the exchange rate as one of the risks to the inflation outlook. So if there was to be a weakness in the currency, it does have implication for the inflation outlook. Though what we had seen had been that the pass-through effects from the exchange rate to inflation had weakened over the past while.
So on balance, Governor, is this high for longer? Is that the approach of the South African Central Bank? Is it similar to the Federal Reserve and what we heard from Chairman Powell, or is it different?
Well, we are focused on the outlook for the South African economy, for both growth and for inflation. The job is not yet done. The decline in inflation is welcome, but we have just had two good prints of inflation. That does not mean that the inflation monster had been conquered. There are still risks on the horizon, and we would watch that very closely.
So it took you 30 hours, I believe, to get here. Is that correct?
Yes.
It took you 30 hours and transferring through different places to get to this remote spot.
It took us 30 hours to get from New York.
It's such a remote spot. What were you hoping to hear? Was this speech worth it?
It's always important to hear what the chair of the Fed says, because what the Fed does has got implications for global financial conditions. And as a small open economy, the effects of U.S. monetary policy have got implications for our outlook. Jackson Hole is always a place to learn. It's not just about the speech of the chair of the Fed. Many of you, I know that is what you watch, but there are very important technical discussions that are going to be taking place over the next 2 days.
There's a bias here, Governor, that I think you can help us blow up. The approach is always, what can you learn from them? What can they learn from you? Emerging market central banks, they are the original front loaders in this cycle. You guys got ahead of this before these guys, before the Federal Reserve. What can they learn from the inflation dynamics that we typically associate with emerging markets? What can they learn from you?
Well, as emerging market central banks, we can tell inflation from a distance. We have, unlike the advanced economies which had experienced close to zero inflation, we had always lived with inflation for some time. And I think that the important lesson just for all the central banks is that complacency could become the enemy. And secondly, that the decisions that we have to take are very complex, but that you can't wait until you have got all the data before you act. By that time, it would be too late. So a risk-based approach is the correct posture to take.
So do you think that on the margins, this Federal Reserve is complacent or too complacent to track the data and to be data dependent in a way that's backward-looking and not getting ahead of inflation that can get out in front of them?
Central banking and monetary policy decisions are very complex. And I have got no doubt that the decisions that the Fed takes, they take them on the best information that they have. And this is central banking. And you make decisions, and economic history always judges you. So I will leave it there.
Something that has happened in the news, which is agreements of China and your South Africa building technology utilities in South Africa brick by brick. help us understand what South Africa just signed on an economic basis with China.
I have not been privy to those kinds of agreements. What I can tell you is that we, as central banks in the BRIC community, we have been in conversations with each other, and our focus had been really on the business of central banking. It had been a focus on putting in place safety nets, and secondly, making sure that our payment systems are interoperable and that it could facilitate trade. That is what central banks had been focused on.